Counseling is so subjective. I feel many professionals who get into the field do so for the right reasons. Though in my experience, I found it's a rare gift to find a therapist who can actually create personal breakthroughs and usher in healing. My heart was in shreds by the time I arrived at Hunt Valley. I'd never felt seen or heard by those who were supposed to care for me, so I'd learned to build high walls around me that were impenetrable. Communicating effectively was an underdeveloped skill at the time because I came from an environment where children weren't allowed to assert themselves. It wasn't safe to have an independent voice. Being the great therapist that she was, Mrs. Tammie Gordon, whom I called Mrs. Tammie, quickly surmised that it would require a different approach and also a gentler one to reach me. That's when she introduced me to the art of journaling, which I found truly therapeutic and still include in my wellness plan today. I didn't have words yet to begin to unpack the complexities of what happened to me, but over weeks that became months of writing and recording my experiences, I was able to touch on the nuanced layers that were tangible to me, but for the most part, unarticulated. My mother had never bestowed me with the opportunity to voice my opinion. I'd been groomed my whole life to not speak about my family's business. Having Mrs. Tammie ask me how I was doing and presenting me with options was foreign to me. The week she handed me a hardbound journal, to my surprise, the journal was outfitted with a small lock that had a key. Mrs. Tammie explained, "This is your personal journal, Chanel. You can write whatever you'd like to write in it. You can curse and scream your words onto the page if you want." I imagine she plainly saw the chip on my shoulder, a result of all the frustration and anger that had carried into my teenage years. I asked her, "This is just between you and me?" She said yes. I asked, "What if I come in here and I don't say anything?" She said, "As long as you write in this journal, it's fine." She had already granted me the freedom to be uninhibited in my writing, and though I didn't yet know how to use my words to express myself, I was bursting at the seams. One of the first things I wrote in it was the statement, "I don't want to talk to you." It was a very good start, as reading it over and over again empowered me and gave me a sense of possession to use my voice however I wanted to. Over time, I learned to fully embody my own voice, and it was the foundation of my healing. Mrs. Tammie's approach was always gentle. She was compassionate and soft-spoken, even when she laughed, and she always wanted to know why. The time we spent together came down to good old-fashioned trust slowly built. She was knocking over the pillars of my distrust. It was evident she loved what she did, but I didn't initially trust that she would want to hear what I had to say. In fact, I just didn't trust women to be the bearers of my most private thoughts at all. Despite my rigid disposition, each time we met, I always felt soothed by the warm and inviting environment of her office. Adding to the ambiance was instrumental music playing softly, either jazz or classical melodies, throw pillows, books, and other trinkets. At each session, she gave me uninterrupted stretches of time to write in my journal. Often I had mixed feelings about what I wrote, in many ways still feeling like I was betraying my mother to write anything that could be perceived as condemning her in any way. Writing also gave me a foray into addressing the molestation and the rapes, which I couldn't talk about. Having already spoken to my great-grandmother and Andrea, the social worker, as a matter of public record, there was a keen sense of embarrassment. I felt humiliated at the idea of talking about it again, but writing about it muted the humiliation. There was an egg timer, and when it went off, we always had a couple of minutes left, in which Mrs. Tammie would always close with, "Do you want to share anything that you've written?" My built-in standard response was, "Maybe next time." Before getting up to leave, I placed my journal back into her care. I took great comfort in watching her lock the journal inside her cabinet drawer. Knowing the privacy of my thoughts was being safeguarded became its own balm. She promised she wouldn't read what I'd written down in my absence. The following week, at the beginning of my session, she'd unlock the cabinet and hand the journal back to me, as I was in possession of the tiny key, which I'd kept to unlatch the lock on the bound journal. She'd ask, "Are you ready for me to read what you wrote last week?" If I said no, we'd talk about something else. If I said yes, she'd ask, "Do you want me to read it aloud, or shall I read it silently?" Mrs. Tammie always offered to read what I'd written aloud. so that I could hear my written words read back to me. But I always preferred for her to read my writing silently. Week after week, she'd ask for permission to read what I'd written, after which she'd take the key to unlock the cabinet. She was incredibly consistent in her methods. Eventually, I grew to trust Mrs. Tammie, and I told her what I was scared of, though I was still very much afraid of what would happen if I risked vulnerability. I was scared of another run-in with my mother, or what she would do next to put my brothers in harm's way. Mrs. Tammie assured me that there was no rush to unveil the truth all at once. We got to a point where I didn't hand over my journal but took the journal home with me. I still journal to this day.